Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for the brief delay. Had some technical issues on my end, but we are all set now and I can go ahead and get started. So I am Alex Grzinski. I am a program specialist with the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about campus prevention and very specifically how it relates to sort of alcohol consumption and prevalence on campus. What are some risk factors, and how can we work on creating better and more protective environments in the campus context through prevention work? So what I'm going to be focusing on today are really, as I said, identifying what are these risks, what are the risk factors associated with alcohol and associated with alcohol consumption on campuses. How can we identify them and understand them better? How can we tailor our prevention programming using that understanding of the risk environments and alcohol consumption? And then finally, how can we utilize techniques such as bystander intervention to create safer communities? And we'll focus in on programs like Safe Bars and talk a little bit about ongoing efforts nationally, as well as what some folks in the Tennessee area and local communities are doing to actually directly work on this. So starting off, NSVRC put together this little infographic, which I thought was really helpful. They put it together sort of in the context of bar environments, but it really applies across the board, especially when you think about the campus setting and the party or sort of social concept within that. So it's a sort of cycle looking at, we know that alcohol increases the risk for perpetration. We know that it has a strong influence with victimization and correlation with that. We know that bar and campus party environments can be highly sexualized. We know that there's a lot of social norming around the hookup culture, and that can really show pretty clearly forth in the bar environment or the campus party environment. We know that young folks on college campuses are an incredibly high risk population. We are just coming up to the end of the red zone, which is the first 4 months or so on campus starting in August, especially where young folks, especially freshmen and sophomores, are at a much higher risk. And we actually see a significantly higher rate of assault on campus during these times. So understanding that, especially in the beginning of the campus time, is really critical. And then finally, it's going to be a hotspot for police reporting. You know, there's a high correlation with parties or bars as where incidents are reported at. We've seen that in data both on and off campus. So actually looking at the risks of alcohol and sort of how it affects a campus environment, there's a couple things that alcohol really specifically applies to. And first, that's the strong relationship between alcohol and sexual violence and intimate partner violence. We've seen that across the board, both on and off campus, and it, you know, it's quite often a factor in assaults or in instances of abuse. When folks come forward, they often say that they had been drinking at the time of their assault or that their perpetrator had been drinking at the time of the assault. See the statistics there. As with a lot of statistics in this field, the range is fairly wide when it comes to sexual violence perpetrators who have been using alcohol at the time, 34 to 74%. You know, as the research gets better on this, I'm sure we'll get a better number, but right now, it's a pretty broad range, and regardless, it's a high correlation that we should pay attention to. One thing that I also want to key in on from this page is that college men are who more frequently attend parties or go to bars are more likely to be sexually aggressive and more likely to be men with impersonal sexual orientation. And so that basically comes from a study that was done pretty recently looking at sort of alcohol consumption and sexual violence prevalence, especially in the campus setting. And they found that, you know, out of all the risk factors, the folks who go to parties or bars or in these more sort of alcohol and social situations are more likely to, have all these risk factors for sexual violence, sexual aggressiveness, impersonal sexual orientation. We already know that those have been long-standing risk factors. So understanding that, this correlation of attending parties and going out increases the risk for those young men is a critical step to sort of understanding who are perpetrators, how can we identify them, and how can we either get them resources or help avoid situations. Finally, a lot of folks, including the CDC, have done a lot of really interesting research lately with really focusing in on what are environmental factors that we can understand about alcohol consumption and how it interplays with IPV and sexual violence. And one of those is the CDC has started mapping density of alcohol availability. So basically they are going into communities, looking at where are the biggest clusters of bars, where are the biggest clusters of alcohol stores, and looking at how does that impact rates of crime, rates of sexual assault, and understanding what that carries along with it. So we've seen through that mapping that this density of availability is really tied to increased IPV rates, increased sexual violence rates, increase of actual alcohol consumption itself, and then increased rates of assaults, violent crime, and injury. And the term broadly that they gave to this sort of correlation is social disorganization. And this being the idea that sort of because of the environment that having all this alcohol accessible around you has, rules and social norms tend to go out the window a bit more. So this can look like increased crime, increased sexual violence rates. But what we really want to pay attention to in this context is what does that mean for folks who are on campus and around the sort of prevalence of this. I'm seeing a question. Someone's having trouble seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Let me see if that helps. Did that help? Okay, great. I'm going to back up really quickly then. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that wasn't on. I'm just going to quickly show you the previous slide. Before that, I talked about learning objectives, went through those. They're pretty simple. I just want to go back one quickly for 1 second and actually look at the little infographic that I used from the NSVRC. Again, it talks about sort of bar environments, but really we're focusing in on, it could be bar, but all of these are very interchangeable and correlate very highly with a campus party environment. So a pretty interchangeable infographic that cuts across there. So back to this, assessing the risk of alcohol. As I was saying about social disorganization, really looking at, what are these social norms that spring out of availability of alcohol, and in the sort of campus culture and context, it's important to understand this. It's also important to understand how folks who might be experiencing availability of alcohol for the first time in their lives, going away to college and having these interactions for the first time can be a whole new, environment that they're learning to navigate on their own. So that only increases the sort of impact of the red zone and the impact of, this at-risk, sort of higher at-risk population. So it's important to understand this, and it's important to keep all this in mind, but it is also important to remember that this can lead to a lot of myths and sort of negative social norming around sexual violence. So just because, I think first and foremost, just because there is a correlation between alcohol and sexual violence does not mean that alcohol causes sexual violence. On both ends. One, no survivor is ever at fault because they were drinking. We want to avoid falling into tropes or stereotypes like that. But on the other end, looking at perpetrators and looking at the data I had shown before about college-age men who go to more parties and go to more bars exhibit more risk factors like sexual aggression. Drinking and alcohol specifically is not what causes them to become perpetrators. So making sure that we understand that and aren't leading the charge of taking away alcohol from campuses will fix everything. The studies actually show that it doesn't necessarily eliminate sexual violence. It can, limiting alcohol, and I'll talk about policies a bit further on, limiting access and limiting some forms of alcohol can be effective and can lead to reduced rates of sexual violence. But alcohol is never the reason why sexual violence occurs. Similarly, this concept of social disorganization, especially on the college campus context, really looking at alcohol, as I said, of being available to a lot of folks for the first time, having this sort of new freedom, having this sort of new mobility that allows folks to, engage in alcohol consumption in the first time or engage in overconsumption is very common on campuses. That can really feed into this idea of social disorganization. And a lot of that comes into play when we see folks really focusing on, hypersexualization during college parties. We see that, it's often branded as the hookup culture. Folks really become impersonal about sexual encounters, and a lot of that feeds into the sort of new social norms of parties and having alcohol around you for the first time. The other aspect of that is because so much of social life and so much of the sort of campus context can be built around social interactions, and often those involve alcohol. The whole concept of going to a party, going out to bars for the night can get really hyped up into, it's sort of a social event, it's a big to-do, and that of course means, people are getting dressed up, people are getting ready, they're getting in their groups of friends, they're getting psyched up, whatever it may be, to go out, and that can lead down the path to a lot of other elements of victim blaming. The one I think that's most important in this context is, what were you wearing? Because men or women dress up to go out, they're going to be dressed up in, clothes that they probably wouldn't wear to class, whatever that may be, whatever their personal style may be. And that can lead down the path of, what were you wearing? Why were you in a shirt skirt? Or why was your clothing tight? Or why was your clothing revealing? Whatever it may have been, all of that sort of context around alcohol and parties on campus leads to that social organization or disorganization that can really sort of fray at normal social norms and cause us to question things and really point at a lot of these false narratives of consumption or the way you're dressed or situational issues that can kind of become the scapegoat of sexual violence. So we want to be aware of that and really focus on combating that. The last piece to this is to kind of break through that fog, break through those false narratives. We really have to focus on building safer communities. And one way in which we do that is really focusing in on, so we have this research that the CDC's done about mapping and hotspots with alcohol. How can we actually look at that and think about creating safer campus environments? So a couple of really key factors to consider within this are availability of alcohol on campus, availability of alcohol off campus or in the sort of surrounding neighborhood of a campus. Dorm policies, is alcohol allowed in dorms? Is it only allowed in dorms for upperclassmen? Is it allowed on campus at all? Which I know a lot of local universities have drinking pledges and stuff like that, where no alcohol is allowed on campus whatsoever. And then the context of social organization. So is the school heavily reliant on Greek life as a main driver of its social life and social context? Is it very focused around clubs and organizations? Is it focused on maybe athletics? So understanding for your individual campus context or your community context, what is the sort of social driver, where are parties happening, where are social gatherings happening, can really allow us to focus in on how to start thinking about our prevention strategies. Again, this is an infographic from NSVRC, really focusing in on why these campus party, campus party contexts and bars can be such hotspots for sexual violence. So we're looking at the environmental structures. It's a poorly lit place, it's packed, there's lots of folks, and of course there's an abundance of access to alcohol. Because it's so crowded, there's lots of movement going on. It might be hard to notice strange or unique behavior, like someone being, maybe cornered by an aggressor or perpetrator, someone who maybe is inappropriately dancing on someone or touching someone. Hard to catch that when there's a huge crowd of folks. Also, that crowding and that sort of huge mass of folks can really attribute to sort of social ambiguity and the bystander effect of, okay, I might be seeing something going on, makes me a little uncomfortable, but so does the rest of the 100 people in this room or this building I'm in. They all see it happening too, and they're not doing anything. Either A, that means it's fine, I don't have to do anything, or B, I'm going to just kind of rely on someone else to, take a stand, take action. It's not my responsibility. Additionally, it just has that final, as I've talked about before, this context of really sexualized, so, the hookup culture, the sort of impersonal nature of sex, and then it's really encouraging heavy alcohol consumption. So whether that's because folks are finding out their limits for the first time, they are drinking for the first time, or because it's seen as the cool thing to do, taking shots or, keg stands or whatever it may be, those kind of things really do get hyped up in the campus context. And the idea of who can drink the most often becomes sort of a social currency within college campuses. And it's important to kind of key into that. So actually looking at, what are some concrete policy approaches you can make. Some of these I realize might be a bit pie in the sky, depending on your role or depending on sort of your access to power and resources within your campus or within your community. But things that we've seen that really do help is reducing the access to alcohol. So again, when the CDC did their alcohol density mapping, they found that the more dense, all of your risk factors across the board are going up. So actually reducing access to alcohol, that could mean not having it available through on-campus convenience stores. That could mean working with local alcohol providers, whether they are gas stations or grocery stores or other folks like that, to work on limiting actual excess. A lot of that could be done through your local county board, working with zoning, the folks from the zoning departments, and working with the alcohol commission boards to actually say, we have too high of a density around this campus. It's negatively affecting our students. It's increasing our risk for sexual violence, all those things. They've also found that increasing the cost of alcohol will reduce consumption. It won't be dramatic, but it certainly will reduce. So again, that's really working on a policy level with your community to say, sort of, can we come together and either put a tax on it or, across the board raise prices on alcohol? That can have an impact. And then limiting purchasing availability. That really focuses in on time. So in a lot of places, grocery stores or gas stations or whoever it may be, are actually time limited. They can only sell alcohol between certain hours. They can't sell it after 10 p.m. Might not be able to buy it on Sundays. All of those techniques have been found to actually increase or to reduce alcohol consumption and thus reduce the risk of sexual violence on campuses. So again, I understand these might be difficult for you in your roles, but something that if you're really taking a community approach and working with local government and working with local decision makers can be really effective and has the data to back it up. And I'll be sure to include those reports from the CDC as links so that folks can read them and reference them if they wanted to go to their local policymakers when I send out this presentation with the evaluations later on. So looking in more at stuff that we can control and how can we work on social norming, how can we work on things within the college context, how do we actually look at creating protective environments? We've identified that these parties, these bars, maybe particular organizations are presenting a higher risk. How can we actually look at creating and making more protective environments out of those existing risk factors? And again, this is an infographic from NSVRC that I thought really sort of illuminated the points very well. First, looking at sort of the actual physical place. So going back to the idea of it being crowded, dimly lit, and creating that sort of risky environment. How can we make physical modifications? How can we make the environment more open so that it feels less dense, less crowded? Whether that is as simple as creating bigger spaces for social gatherings on campus, or not having them be dimly lit. Little physical changes that can make a big impact. And then, of course, looking at alcohol density, which I won't go into again. The other part is working actually with either bar staff or your campus organizations, whether they're Greek life, athletics, social clubs, doing trainings with them. How can you serve alcohol at your parties in a more healthy environment? How can you look out for red flags of someone who's been overserved, someone who might be in danger, someone who might feel uneasy, especially if a perpetrator or potential perpetrator is making them uncomfortable, and how can you effectively intervene if you do see those situations occurring? And then the context, which is really that social norm of how can you build this safer and healthier campus community? So how can you get, social norms campaigns, either looking at maybe something like reducing victim blaming. So challenging the narrative of what were you wearing, challenging the narrative of what were you drinking through social media campaigns, or maybe it's flyers around campus. Another big piece of this is getting the opportunity to train freshmen when they're first coming onto campus, talking about sort of, what the expectation is here, getting a chance to get out ahead of that red zone in August or in September, depending on when school starts, and really working directly with freshmen to say, we respect each other here. We're a community where we ask each other to make sure everyone's safe. We're a community where you should feel like you have the resources and the support to either identify and report problems, or to come forward with your own stories, or to support your friends and them coming forward if they are survivors or if they want to start taking action. So all of those can be really effective sort of social norms in building out a more protective environment on the college campus. So there's a couple folks that are doing this already and doing it really quite well. The Safe Bar Collective is sort of the national overarching structure. As you can tell from the name, they really do focus in on the bar context, but this can be sort of metered out more generally to restaurants. It could be, a local diner on your college campus, whatever it may be. This program really focuses on training and working with the servers, the owners, the management of bars, and getting them sort of up to speed on how to identify red flags and how to actually be effective interveners. And the actual content of it really focuses on sort of the correlation between sexual aggression and nightlife, like I had mentioned before with that social disorganization. Looking at microaggressions and discrimination. So they really dial in on the racial equity piece of that, which is wonderful, as well as the gender equity piece of that. How to identify microaggressions, how to identify discrimination in practice so that you can get out ahead and understand that it can be very highly correlated with sexual violence or IPV. Also looking at, just a refresher on making sure everyone understands consent, make sure everyone understands the context of alcohol and consent. And then it really dives into this sort of bystander skill set of how do you, as a server, bouncer, whoever it may be, feel comfortable and feel empowered to actually reach out and make a change when you see something happening. A lot of campuses and communities across the US have really taken this and ran with it. One I think of the best examples is the Raise the Bar program at Chapel Hill. They've been rolling out the Safe Bar curriculum sort of personalized to their Chapel Hill campus community context for quite some time now, and have seen a lot of really great success with it. So I definitely recommend. They put out a lot of publications, they put out a lot of information about their sort of successes and where they want to grow. So I definitely recommend looking them up and seeing if they might be a helpful guide if you're thinking about rolling out similar programs. I also know that the Arizona Safe Bar Alliance has been doing exceptional work, especially in sort of the community context, working with local officials, working with local pubs and bars, and they've definitely been leading the way in that. Another program more locally that has been really focused on that is Safe Bar trainings actually being rolled out by Department of Health educators across Tennessee. That is a growing program right now. I don't know that it is offered in every single county just yet, but they are certainly pushing towards that. And a couple counties, a couple health educators have really taken up that mantle and have really pushed for it. So certainly something, if you work with your local health educator, to approach them about and say you're interested in, having your campus community or having your community, help them identify a couple bars that would be really benefit from the training, especially if they're, high, where students tend to cluster and have high prevalence. That can be really powerful and certainly is a growing program that the Department of Health is excited about. And as part of that, the Sexual Assault Center here in Nashville, we at the Coalition have partnered with them on some prevention efforts, and one of those is sort of implementing safe bars and implementing aspects of the safe bar curriculum throughout Nashville, and we're trying to grow that program at the moment. One of those sort of really concrete things that we do is working with bars on the Angel Shot program, which is the flyer you'll see right here. And the Angel Shot is something that gets posted up in bathrooms, on some of the bar windows and some of the decals. And this essentially just lets folks know, if you feel unsafe, uncomfortable, or even a little just weird about whatever might be going on, maybe it's someone who is making you feel uncomfortable, maybe it's the general situation. Whenever you feel that your safety or your personal comfort level has been violated, you can go up to bartenders and sit and order an Angel Shot, which is kind of an innocuous way of not drawing attention to yourself, not making yourself feel even less safe by asking for help, but really just being able to go up to a bartender, order an Angel Shot, and that is the clue or the trigger for them to kind of spring into action. And that could look like them stepping in, having the bouncer escort a particular person out. Maybe they bring you off to the side or to the back to have a conversation with you about exactly what your needs are. Maybe it's as simple as, I just really need someone to call me an Uber so I can get out of here. And they can help you sort of go along with that. Of course, as part of that, those bars have received the Safe Bar training in some way. So the staff actually knows how, to effectively and safely conduct all of those measures. Again, this is something we're really looking to increase and roll out, but it's been very effective in a lot of other cities. Washington, D.C. is where it started, so they are sort of the central location. A lot of restaurants and bars are trained by them at this point, and they've built out quite the network. And it's been finding a lot of success so far. So we're excited about that. Transitioning into sort of the second half of this, I wanted to focus in on bystander intervention and actually looking at, what are some, you might not be able to afford safe bars, you might not be able to work with your local officials, or maybe they're uninterested in re-examining things like that. You might not have access to all of those, but if you're working with a campus community or on a campus community, you do have access to students. And you do have access to administrators who, whether they're coaches or teachers or any staff at all, who are actively working with these students, who are seeing these sort of issues play out every day. And bystander intervention, I think, is a really wonderful way to equip your campus community with these skills and with the sort of resources they need to effectively work against and help prevent sexual violence on campus. So bystander intervention is important because it really develops these skills and the courage needed to intervene. It allows folks to really stand up and say, this is not what we do here. This is not the behavior that we support in our campus community, and we're not going to stand for it. Someone's going to say something, someone's going to stop you, someone's going to intervene. And it's incredibly difficult, and it can be socially stigmatized and scary for a lot of students. But the whole bystander approach really focuses in on how do you get past that fear by building up your skill set and building up your actual ability to intervene. One thing that I think is really critical about it is that it allows you to take this community approach to setting a social norm of, this is not what we do here. We don't overserve people to the point where they're stumbling around and try to take advantage of them because they're drunk. We don't corner people and become really overly sexually aggressive or aggressive with them because they've been overserved, whatever it may be. Whatever these sort of problems or issues you've noticed in your campus are, this is a really great way to influence that. It also gets to take a look at it from a sort of public health lens and educate folks that sexual violence is a community problem. It is something that is happening here. It is something that we cannot ignore, but it's also a preventable problem. And it kind of gives you the opportunity to, from a public health stance, look at what are risk factors that influence sexual violence on our campus community. We talked a bit about before of all of the social environments and risk environments that alcohol can influence, talking about those as well as what other unique aspects of your campus community might influence sexual violence. It reduces stigma, which is also great because it allows folks to become informed and to speak out. And anytime you're working on reducing stigma, like the "what are you wearing," victim blaming type of language, that's a big win for sort of general prevention and general education levels. It also is a really great opportunity to kind of get folks across genders involved. So we've found that, often men feel, especially on a college campus, feel intimidated by the idea of getting involved with anything having to touch sexual violence. They feel like this is a woman's problem. It's something they should deal with. It's something that either, one, they're not a rapist, so they don't need to be involved. It's those quote unquote other guys, or they're scared to step up and talk about it because they think it's not a safe or a welcoming environment, that people assume men are perpetrators, that people assume men are the problem, and thus are pretty hesitant to actually get involved. Bystander intervention is a really simple way to empower, especially young men who don't feel comfortable getting involved, with a little tools to say, okay, you want to stop this problem. You don't like the implications it has, you don't like the community it builds on campus, do something about it, and do something about it with your friends, with your community, at the parties you go to, and that can be incredibly powerful. So actually looking at the bystander approach, it really focuses on building skills, developing meaningful relationships among students, and fostering community ownership. So the idea of whether or not that's my best friend or someone I've never known, they are part of my campus community, they are part of my campus family. I have a personal responsibility to make sure they're okay, check in on them, and it's not weird, it's not invasive, it's not something that I should be nervous about. It's just something that is a normal thing to do. So the bystander effect is one of the factors that sort of influence helping. So we have a couple sort of barriers that are always problematic and can kind of prevent folks from getting involved. Diffusion of responsibility, or the bystander effect, is one of those. I think that's really well illustrated in the little image on the bottom left. Looking at the idea of someone is on a public transport, is on a bus, or in our context is at a party, and someone's yelling at them, being aggressive, taking an aggressive stance, and the other person is clearly showing signs of, looking down, shutting down, is using their body language to convey how uncomfortable they are. This is a pretty clear-cut case where someone's being made uncomfortable by someone else, and yet everyone there's tons of people on the bus, or there's tons of people at the party, and they all kind of decide, like we talked about before, it's someone else's responsibility. I don't really need to get involved. There's a couple other factors similar to that can really influence and dissuade against folks helping. Another one of those being situational ambiguity. We talked a little bit about that before. The idea that, I don't know the context, I don't know the relationship, the existing relationship with these folks. They might be, best friends who are in a fight. They might be, in a relationship of several years and they're having a bad night and nothing violent's going to happen. So who am I to get involved? Who am I to, overstep my boundaries? Perceived cost, really looking at, what do I get out of this? Often there's a negative perceived cost of bystander intervention. People are going to think that I'm a goody two-shoes. People are going to think that I'm always in other people's business. And they, students often fail to see the sort of community health aspect of, I'm creating a safer place. I would want someone to do this for me. So reinforcing that and sort of breaking through that, what will it do for you? Well, you're not going to get a medal. You're not going to be carried down the streets in a parade, but you are helping create a safer community and you are positively contributing to your campus environment. Then finally, similarity. This could really either help or hurt. A lot of times we see folks just not helping because that person doesn't look like them. They're not from the same community. They don't feel any tie. This is just a stranger I have nothing in common with. Why should I go out of my way to help? I think the similarity is really one of the key pieces that you can actually build on to positively influence helping. And that being, you're part of a campus community, taking just a local school like MTSU, for example. You're part of the MTSU community. You are a student here. You have a bond and a commonality with all the other students here, unified just by the fact that you go to school together, but also by the fact that, you hopefully have some sense of campus pride, sense of ownership of, I live here. I want this to be the best place it can be. I want to get the most out of my college experience that I can. And I've found, and studies have found, that can be a really powerful motivator for students to actually say, okay, you know what, I am going to get involved. I am going to practice bystander intervention. So one of the biggest things, and we've talked about this a little bit, is your biggest barrier to implementing bystander intervention is going to be combating social norms. And a lot of times conversations about even, the simplest things like healthy sexuality or just sex at all on college campuses can be difficult to have. They can be inaccessible. They can be scary to some folks. Not attacking, but sort of breaking down those social norms is a critical first step in actually understanding and being able to utilize bystander intervention effectively. And especially in the context of victim blaming, which we've already talked about quite a bit, but really being able to understand in your campus context, what are the tropes, what are the false narratives that people rely on to sort of overlook sexual violence? How can you understand those and turn those on their head or refute them and really start making progress in bystander intervention? So there's 4 main steps when you're actually undertaking this and when you're trying to get students or administrators to really get involved. And that's first just, a very basic human, notice that something's going on, understand, sort of, I see a disturbance. Recognize that it's not just something happening, but it's something that is wrong or bad or harmful. Take personal responsibility. And of course, this is what all of those barriers we've been talking about, this is what that goes after. It's not my responsibility. It's not my fault. It's not me. I'm not gonna, put myself out there, put my social status on the line, whatever it may be, to get involved with something I don't even know about. And that can be really critical. Then finally, and I think the piece that sort of overtakes that or helps influence that personal responsibility piece is knowing that you can actually help, knowing that you have the skills and the resources and the support to make a positive impact. And understanding, especially the skills piece, I like to use this GIF because this baby has superhuman strength. That's their skill set that they can actually do to help. So helping everyone identify what is your skill set and how can it be employed. The model that we always use when we train this at the coalition is the 4 Ds of bystander intervention. I really like to refer to it as 3.5. The first 3 are all wonderful techniques that can stand alone and be effectively used on their own. The 4th is kind of a combination that you'll use with another one of these techniques to actually find success. So the first one, being direct, actually getting in and directly confronting someone, saying, hey, what you're doing is bothering me. Hey, what you're doing is making that person uncomfortable. I'd like to talk to you about it. And just kind of, very clearly and without any confusion or anything else, just saying, we don't do that here. What you're doing isn't okay. We need to talk about it or we need to resolve the situation. A lot of people get this confused with harmful behaviors, like a direct, intervention needs to involve some kind of physical force. It needs to be 2 people are arguing in each other's faces and some person runs up and shoves them apart as hard as they can. This is a really important aspect because, there are behaviors that are going to escalate conflict and confrontation, and there are behaviors that are going to de-escalate. And just because you're using a direct method does not mean that you need to be escalating the conflict, the confrontation. So giving students and giving administrators skills to be able to directly address something in an appropriate and sort of measured way so that they can go in, talk to someone, have the conversation, and not sort of make it worse, incite violence or whatever it may be. Pushing someone, shoving someone, making physical space through use of force is always going to escalate, is always going to make something worse because it will rub everyone the wrong way. So being direct does not mean being physical and being violent. The next one, distraction. This is a really great one, especially if you aren't someone who feels comfortable being super direct or getting in someone's face or having a really tough conversation that maybe you don't feel like you're ready to have. Distraction can be really powerful. It can be as simple as coming up and telling a joke, coming up and saying, hey, I really need you to, my mom just called and I need to go home. Can you walk me to my car? Going up and saying, oh, I just spilled my drink on my pants and I really need you to come to the bathroom with me and help get the stain out. super easy. You can come up with a myriad of excuses. You don't need to know someone to go up and pretend like you know them and say, hey, can you come help me with something? And what's important about the sort of distraction aspect is that it breaks the pace of a conversation or a confrontation. Sometimes folks are in each other's faces. They're acting in a way that they wouldn't be proud of. They're acting in a way that is very much driven by the heat of the moment, anger, and coming up and breaking that, sort of locked in, heated moment can be really effective in just making folks take a step back and say, actually, you know what, I'm not as angry about this as I thought I would be, or I'm making bad decisions right now. I'm gonna retrack and work my way back and try to make this better. Obviously that's the ideal situation. That won't always happen, but it can at times, and that can be really powerful. Moving on to delegate. This is going to be really important, especially if you're thinking about sort of the red zone and thinking about interactions where folks are new on campus and might not feel super comfortable. This really focuses in on knowing either you're not a confrontational person or you feel better when you've sort of got a team of supporters behind you, or you aren't the person to intervene, but someone else might be. The example I always give is you're a freshman on the football team on campus, and you see the senior who's a captain, who's the best player, doing something that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe they are being really sexually aggressive with someone you know, and it's another freshman who lives on your dorm. Going up and saying, hey, captain of the team that I'm on, who holds the most social status of the group that I'm in, I need you to stop what you're doing because it bothers me, is absolutely terrifying for an 18, 19-year-old. It's going to be pretty hard to get someone who feels comfortable doing that. That's a perfect example of a time when you can go and they find another senior. They find their co-captain. They find anyone who has a better relationship. Maybe that person has a best friend who's at the party. You find that person that has the better connection, the better resource, whatever it may be, and you get them to intervene on your behalf. Or you say, you know what, if a group of us all go up and say, hey, we've identified what you're doing is making us uncomfortable, it's a lot harder to say no or to act out of anger and say, you don't know what you're talking about, get out of my face. So this can be a really powerful tool, especially when you think about sort of chipping away at those social status implications that might make intervention really difficult for folks. Finally, delay. So as I said before, this is kind of a tactic that you use in concert with the other ones. Often it's just giving you some time to understand and maybe chip away at some of that situational ambiguity, get the facts, understand what's going on, and be able to build out a sort of tactic for intervention. So really just kind of reminding students or administrators or staff, take a second. If you're uncomfortable, but you're not totally sure what's going on, take a second. You don't need to charge in right away. You can take a minute, either calm your nerves or take a second to, get someone else who might understand the situation better, and then approach it in a more informed way using one of the other three techniques. So as you come out of that, really focus on when you're, with the folks that you're working with or the community that you're working with, what are your skills and how can you actually apply them? We're not asking folks to suddenly become direct confrontational folks that feel comfortable putting anyone, checking anyone, calling anyone out, sort of on a whim. We're asking folks to use what they're already good at. Are you naturally funny? Great. Go tell a joke and cause a distraction. Are you, I was the youngest of four in a big, loud family. I'm very comfortable yelling to be heard. I'm very comfortable sort of making my presence known because it was the only way that you could get anywhere in my house growing up. I'm fine with direct confrontation. That doesn't mean everyone will be, but that's my skill set. I know that already. I know I can take that into each situation. And then once folks have their sort of skill set and their strategies down, understand each situation is going to call for an informed approach. So just because I'm comfortable with a direct sort of confrontation or direct style doesn't mean it's always the right choice. I need to understand what's going on, what's the context, what's the situation each time, and understand that my approach, maybe I'll need to bring a group with me because that'll be most effective. Or maybe I need to go cause a distraction because logical reasoning is out the door at this point. So understand in each context really how things are going to play out. And then finally, being aware of your power and privilege. This really gets at what I was talking about with the freshmen or the different social statuses on campus. You know, you might not be the best person to intervene in this situation, and that's okay because there are other people who can help you. Or maybe, you know, especially if you're working with campus leaders, you are the best person to intervene in a situation. You are the president of an organization. You are the captain of a team. You know, you are more than anyone else need to take that sort of responsibility, need to stand up and say, this is a social norm that I am enforcing here and that I am going to be held accountable for. So I'm going to intervene when I think it's appropriate. And that can be a really powerful message to sort of campus leadership often. So overarching rules, safety is the first concern for bystander intervention. We're not asking anyone to put on a cape and, you know, go enforce vigilante justice on their campus. Do not put yourself at risk. Do not put other people at risk. Safety should be your first priority. And a big part of that risk is not escalating a situation. So don't go in and make it worse. Don't go in and start, you know, being physical, confronting people, yelling at people, being in their faces. Understand that that's going to make it worse, better than, or more so than better in most situations. Understand what the early warning signs and the red flags are and intervene at the earliest possible point. So how can you look at body language, you know, see someone is sort of leaning against the wall, uncomfortable, maybe covering themselves, see those kind of signs, see someone grab someone in a way that, you know, is a little rougher than it should have been, and realize that that physical interaction could escalate very quickly. And remember that intervening doesn't always mean confronting. There are other resources, there are other things at play that can help you. And don't be afraid to ask for help. You don't have to be the person that intervenes, but you can be part of the solution, even if it's not directly you. And then last, 3 things you can do on your campus or in your community. Look out, you know, have folks look out for their classmates, have folks look out for their other community members and intervene when it's appropriate. So actually practicing bystander intervention. Challenge the social norms within your community. Really looking at what are, you know, whether it's approaching victim blaming, whether it's approaching this sort of idea of social disorganization, that norms go out the window when you're at a party, understanding all of those aspects and being able to challenge those and refute those false narratives. And then celebrate the actions of bystanders. So if you actually see one of your students, one of your student leaders, one of your faculty, or one of your coworkers doing this, whether big or large, or sorry, large or small, celebrate them. Say, thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for speaking up in that meeting. I felt uncomfortable too, but wasn't sure how to say something. Celebrate them and make sure that they feel like their actions didn't go unnoticed, that their actions actually made an impact, because that will definitely increase their likelihood to intervene again. And it'll also, the public celebration of them and the public output of this intervention will make folks more likely to intervene in the future. And that's all I have for you today. I'll stay on for a couple of minutes. If you'd like to ask any questions, you can ask it in the chat box or in the question functionality. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. As I said before, we will be sending out this presentation as well as making it available on our website. And I'll include, when I send out the presentation, some links to some of those studies and some of the sort of technique-based things and guidance that the CDC has sent out. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll hang around to see if there are any questions. So I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat or the question functionality. Again, if you do have anything that you're curious about, please send it over. But if not, folks are welcome to head off, and thanks for joining. Oh, yes. Someone just asked if they're going to be getting a certificate about attending the webinar. Yes, those will be sent out. That will be sent out sort of in conjunction with the presentation and the links. So you'll definitely get a certificate from the coalition that shows that you've attended. And that's the only question I've gotten. So if you have any other follow-up, please either call us at the coalition or email me personally. My email's right up there in the slide. And then I'll include my contact info with the certifications and other stuff that gets sent out. Thanks so much for attending, and I hope to see you all in the future.